Two very distinct Genshin Impact dramas with two very different responses and a bunch of free Primogems and even some new codes. Genshin has been absolutely crazy these last several days, and while I don't focus on drama, these issues do concern free Primogems, new codes, and holding Hoyoverse to a higher standard, which I do cover. And especially with all the changes, nerfs, boycotts, lawsuits, review bombs, doxing, and subsequent responses, I think it's time to weigh in. Now, if you don't know what I'm referring to, there's two major scandals right now. One is concerning new Valettes, and the other is regarding the next big update for Genshin and the region of Natlin. We'll start with the new Valette drama first, since that is the most recent. As soon as patch 4.8 went live, players received a notification that new Valette had been quote-unquote fixed. And what was that fix, you ask? Well, players could make new Valette's Hydro Pump spin incredibly fast by turning up their mouse sensitivity and flicking it in one direction. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering why anyone would subject themselves to this incredibly dizzying playstyle. It's simple. Damage. Lots and lots of AoE damage. Now, I personally did not enjoy this playstyle because I found it way too disorienting, but a lot of people liked it, and it was especially helpful for mobile players who have a lot of trouble moving around with new Valette. But after the 4.8 update, Hoyo fixed new Valette by removing his propeller power washing machine capabilities. So what's the big deal? If a character isn't working properly, they should be fixed, right? Well, the problem was new Valette was released in patch 4.1. Almost a year prior to when this video was recorded. During this time, Hoyo made no mention or classification that this type of playstyle was a bug, and they also did not mention any intention to fix it. They just sprung it on players almost a year later with no warning. This made a lot of new Valette players understandably upset because it killed a specific playstyle, and more importantly, it made him much harder to play on mobile devices. So isn't this just a case of nerd rage? What's the big deal? Well, in many Asian countries, it's illegal to nerf a gacha game character because it's considered a fraudulent bait and switch type of tactic that cheats people out of their money. And this caused many people to complain to their government officials and bring lawsuits against Hoyoverse for fraudulent practices. And within a day, Hoyoverse responded by reversing these changes to new Valette and sending everyone 1600 Primogems as an apology in their in-game mail. They also sent 100 Primogems as compensation for the original quote-unquote fix, i.e. nerf, so players can get one free 10 pull worth of Primogems plus another 100 in their in-game mail right now. This matter was resolved pretty quickly, which I guess is what happens when you cross a Judge of Fontaine. The other issue, however, has not been solved and just seems to keep getting bigger. This issue is around the new region of Natlin scheduled to arrive before Genshin's 4th anniversary. A teaser trailer showed off the location and many of the characters coming in the next big expansion, but something was obviously missing, namely the amount of melanin in the characters. If you're unaware, the region of Natlin is based on Mesoamerican and African cultures, yet the characters range from pale to very pale. Many people have pointed out that borrowing from these cultures while also whitewashing the characters is a form of colorism. And this has been called out by tons of people in the Genshin community. I know the global community does not like it, but I've also heard that the CN community really dislikes the colorism of Natlin characters as well. There's also petitions to stop Genshin's cultural appropriation, with more than 75,000 signatures at the time of recording, 10,000 of which have been added in just one day. And there's also been prominent content creators and even several of the game's own voice actors that have shared their displeasure at Hoyo's decision. And when Paimon calls something out and then subsequently gains the moral high ground because of it, that's when you know they're cooked. This lack of inclusion is at best tone-deaf, but let's play devil's advocate and assume that Genshin's Natlin character designs are not a form of discrimination based on skin tone, and instead just a mistake, an oopsie are bad situation. I'd like to bring your attention to a specific quest in Sumeru, which, by the way, many people have also called out Hoyo for having too many pale characters, but that's not what I want to focus on. Instead, I want to share with you a small portion of one of the multiple parts of Kave's Hangout quest. Without getting into any spoilers, there is a portion of the quest where you have to find Kave's teacher, Zaha Hadid. She is a renowned architect and Kusharwar lecturer. For most people, this leg of the quest was pretty banal. But when I played it, I was freaking out and going crazy on stream, because Kave's teacher, Zaha Hadid, is clearly an homage to the real-life Pritzker Prize-winning architect, Zaha Hadid. The vast majority of people would never get this reference unless they studied architecture, which is why it's such a surprise to me that a reference like this was included in a silly game about gambling for anime characters. But it's that very attention to detail and willingness to include very specific cultural references, even if the vast majority of people won't appreciate them, that really makes Genshin a lot less silly, and surprisingly a lot more profound. So if the creative team takes this much care to pay tribute to the cultures that inspire their game, why can't they get the simplest things right, like the skin tones of characters based on Mesoamerican and African regions? Well, I don't know how the creative team works and who makes the decisions and why, but I can tell you that this was absolutely a conscious decision. Hoyo simply pays too much attention and care about their world building and character design to miss something as obvious as this. And this is what I find most unfortunate about the whole situation. Hoyo has historically taken a lot of care to pay homage and derive inspiration from a culture. From its music, to the environments, to the clothing, to the mythos, and so much more. Hoyo has spent a lot of resources and time to make sure that what they are portraying feels like an authentic representation of another culture in their fantasy world. But with regard to the skin tone of playable characters in regions like Sumeru and in the upcoming region of Natlan, they just decided to throw that away. To be fair to Hoyo, there are a few playable characters and plenty of non-playable characters that have a more accurate skin tone for the region of Sumeru, but because they're relegated to mostly non-playable characters and enemies, some people understandably feel this is a bit of a slap in the face. Before this scandal, a lot of people were really excited for Natlan, especially because this was the time when Hoyo could use their creative talent and resources to breathe life into an African and Mesoamerican inspired nation. Many people could finally see what Hoyo would do when given their culture as inspiration, and how they would pay homage to their heritage. And even though Hoyo has had some issues with skin tone in the past, there's no way the characters inspired from Mesoamerican and African nations would be just as pale as the rest of the cast, right? But when the Natlan trailer dropped, so did a lot of people's stomachs. Sure, there's an incredible amount of detail and care built into the world, the clothing, the music, the characters' names, and so forth. But when it came to the look of the characters, it's quite obvious that they didn't appear anything like the people Natlan derives its inspiration from. And it's okay to borrow from various cultures, but what's not okay is to borrow the fruits of a culture and then purposefully leave out the people that are responsible for building that culture, and instead replacing them with others who are not representative of that culture's population. This is a form of discrimination and appropriation. And what I find really sad is that this whole issue was so easily preventable, and it could have also made so many people really happy if it was just a little bit more accurate in the representation of the people from the real-life cultures that inspire this new nation. But instead, Hoyo chose to represent everything about the people, except the people. At the time of recording, Hoyo has still not made any statement about this issue, and I want to contrast their response to the Nouvelette fix and the dissatisfaction with the Natlan characters. Nouvelette was changed and then was reverted back to his original state in one day, and we got 1600 Primogems as an apology. There's been radio silence on the Natlan issue for almost 2 weeks. And why is this? Well, it's simple. It's a legal and financial issue. Nouvelette's changes brought legal complaints and lawsuits that Hoyo would have to fight in multiple different countries. And given the laws regarding gacha games in Asia, they would have very likely lost or at least had to settle. And this looks really bad right before big important events like a new expansion or the game anniversary, especially to a company's shareholders. But the skin tone issue with Natlan's characters, it's at worst bad PR for the company and some lost sales, but ultimately I don't think it's enough to move the needle. I'd love to be wrong, but in my opinion, I don't think much will change. And I think a lot of people who are upset with Hoyo over this issue also know that. And so it can feel that voicing their complaints is almost like shouting into a void. But with a united community voicing their displeasure, as well as established voice actors coming out against the company, maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of people have been disappointed with how Hoyo has handled issues with Genshin in the past, and they've asked me my thoughts plenty of times, so I'll tell you the same thing that I've told many others many times before. Keep your standards high, but your expectations low. Even though things may not change for the better, that does not mean you should ever lower your standards, especially when it comes to things that are important. Hopefully Hoyo listens and fixes this issue that honestly should have never arisen in the first place. I know all this drama can be tiring, so as a thank you for listening, I have a few codes on screen here. Unfortunately, they don't give any Primogems, but it's still free resources. And I guess this is just the perfect time to practice the mantra, keep your standards high, but your expectations low. Because, come on, no primos in these codes? Really, Hoyo? Thanks for being here, everyone. I love you, stay jawsome, be excellent to each other, and I can't wait to see you on stream and in the next video.